Members, could you take your seats, please? We're due to start in about a minute. Good evening, members, and welcome to this Policy and Resources Committee meeting. Before we start on the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated to enable Mr. Bailey to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? Can't see anybody indicating. I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Members, I think we're going to have a highly entertaining evening tonight, and most of us would wish maybe that we were down there seeing the DJ as well. And I know she's going to blush, but I like to say when somebody's got a celebration, and I'm not asking you to sing happy birthday, please, but Georgia has her birthday today, and I think that really is a dutiful councillor who turns up here on her birthday. So congratulations, Georgia. Okay. Item 1, apologies for absence. Mr. Bailey?
Yep, I've received apologies from Councillor Harwood.
Thank you. And substitute member?
Councillor English for Councillor Harwood.
Thank you. Members, there's an urgent update which I have accepted and has been circulated to members electronically, and paper copies are available to members, and, well, we haven't got any public tonight. The reason for urgency is that this appendix relates to the budget which needs to be agreed tonight and recommended to Council on the 28th of February. Members, I suggest we don't stop proceedings now, but if you need time to read it, we'll do it at the beginning of that item, give you time to just have a good look at that, if that's acceptable. Is that acceptable? Thank you. Notification of visiting members, I don't see any tonight. Disclosures by members and officers, are there any? No, there are none. Disclosures of lobbying, has there been any lobbying? No, thank you. There's an exempt item. I propose that we take item 18, Brunswick and Union Street car park developments in private due to the possible disclosure of exempt information. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. So if we can turn to agenda item 8, which you'll find on pages 1 to 12, minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January, which I will take page by page. So page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Are they agreed as an accurate record, members? Thank you. So you're happy for me to sign those. Thank you. Agenda item 9, I believe there are no petitions, is that correct? And there are no questions. Agenda item 10, sorry, I knew I'd slip over something fairly soon, from the public. So with that, we go straight to page 13, agenda item 11, which is the committee work programme. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of things to draw your attention to on the committee work programme. First of all, there's a report shown here on a sky lantern ban. This item will in fact be going to the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee because that's the more relevant committee to consider it. And the item below that, Phase 3 public realm funding, that's going to be considered at a special meeting which you should have heard about at the beginning of March rather than on the normal date for policy and resources in March. Thank you.
Members, are there any questions? No. Can I take it then that the committee work programme is agreed? Thank you. So agenda item 12 is on page 14 to 34. Mr Clark, I think you're leading in on this.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What you have before you tonight, members, is a proposed update to the Council's counter-fraud and corruption policy. The existing policy is nearly a decade old now and is fine as far as it goes, but has missed out some updates in legislation, such as the Counter-Bribery Act of 2010, and some updates in best practice, such as the SIP for Counter-Fraud Code of 2016. So those developments obliged us to reconsider, I think, revise the policy, but we also took the opportunity to orient it slightly more towards risk analysis and prevention. The existing policy is very much slanted to, we have found a fraud, and now what? Whereas this policy aims to move the game a little bit earlier and think about how we would examine fraud risk and what sort of work we would undertake to prevent and detect it. The detail that will then follow from that will be a part of the audit and assurance plan that the Audit Governance and Standards Committee will see next month and then every year thereafter. The policy had a detailed and very, for my mind, interested and engaged discussion at Audit Governance and Standards Committee last month, and there are, I think, at least 5, possibly more, I may have missed some, with apologies, members of that committee who are here this evening. I've set out as a supplementary appendix some of the changes that were made as a result of that meeting, which were principally useful suggestions around emphasising some of the concepts, beefing up some of the wording, and providing some explanations of matters which are necessarily left out of the detail because they relate to the procedure of an investigation, but do aim to give some assurance that investigations would be undertaken competently, fairly and professionally when the need arises. I'm happy to take any question members may have, Madam Chairman.
Before I take questions, Councillor McLaughlin, as Chairman of Audit, did you wish to say anything at this point?
Thank you, Chair. No, I've seen the amendments that have got in. They seem to comply with what was discussed at my committee, and I concur that it did get a bit of a roasting. But I have confidence in what's being produced now. Thanks.
Have Councillor Harvey next and then Councillor.
Thank you. We discussed this at great length at audit and made lots of changes and really thought it through. And in light of that, I'm happy to propose the recommendations in the paper.
Councillor Blackmore.
I was just going to propose it if it's already been through audit.
Are there any other questions? No? Right, that has been proposed by Councillor Harvey, seconded by, oh dear, Clive. Councillor English, thank you very much. You will find the recommendation on page 14 that the counter fraud and corruption policy is approved. May I have a show of hands for those in favour, please? That is unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Rich. You may stay if you wish or go as you wish. All right, thank you. Mr. Clark, sorry. It doesn't take me long to start. Right. I'll just give the officers time to change chairs. All right, members, we're on to agenda item 13, which is on pages 35 to 45. And Mrs. Woodhouse, I believe you're leading on this.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So as members will see, the performance this quarter has largely been positive, with 67% of indicators achieving their target. Highlights include cleanliness levels in relation to litter and levels of detritus, and the number of fly tips cleared has also achieved target. However, processing of minor applications is below target, as are the number of affordable homes delivered. We have exceeded the target for number of households prevented from becoming homeless through intervention, and the number of households housed through the housing register has also exceeded target by 30. And I'm happy to take questions.
Before I take questions, I'll just let Councillor Garland sit down. Good evening. Have you had any lobbying, Councillor Garland, or disclosure of interests? Thank you very much. Councillor Blackmore, you indicated.
I did actually. I'm a little bit concerned by 3.12 on page 39 about only delivering 43 affordable homes, bearing in mind the stresses we're under. Are there any dates you can give us or an idea that you can give us when this is going to improve? And if not, I'm very happy to receive the information by email at a later date, but I'd just like a little bit of backup. So if you are aware, great. If you're not, no problem.
Please come in.
Thank you. It's a topic that we're looking at closely. How we're planning to address it is by producing a supplementary planning guidance document on affordable housing that will really beef up the existing policy that we have within the local plan for affordable housing. So that works in train now, and it's sort of something that is referred to in one of Mark Green's later reports this evening, that we've set some money aside, or hoping to set some money aside to take that work forward. 50,000 pounds in total, as it's part of a bigger project, but it would be something that we would commission.
Sorry, just to come back on that, how many other partners would be involved in that? I have seen in the, the business rates retention special pilot projects, but how many other partners are actually going to be involved in that?
So the supplementary planning guidance is just a small part of the whole project, so I wouldn't imagine we'll be spending anywhere near that sum on the supplementary planning guidance document. But that's the first step that we need to take, is to beef up the policy that we have around affordable housing.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is on page 44, and it's something that struck me when I read it, and it's really a question. When I see the percentage of relevant land and highways with, and this is the word that gets me, acceptable levels of litter, it's a strange wording, because what on earth is an acceptable level of litter, and who actually makes that decision? Because to me, when I go around various areas, both urban and rural, there's still a hell of a lot of litter around, which does concern me. So it's the word acceptable, and how has that come about, and what is the criteria for being acceptable?
Mrs Woodhouse.
Yeah, I'm happy to share with you outside the meeting the methodology for the indicator, which will show you how it's worked out. And I agree, the language is quite archaic, isn't it, sort of its time. It actually comes from the old set of national indicators. So I completely understand where you're going, where you're coming from in terms of what's acceptable, what's not. But it is a standard. So it's a standard they measure against when they survey the streets, and they measure it against, and that's where it comes out as. But I will send you the methodology so you can get under it and see what it means.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. On page 44, under a number of litter reports attended to, it's showing us there's been a decrease. Is there a particular reason for that, or is it just that less reports have been made online?
I don't have the answer to that in front of me. Are you okay if I go and find that out and report back to you? Thank you.
Did you have any other question? Was that it? Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just hark back to Councillor Perry's comments, which were very, very interesting and quite pertinent. May I request that the information that he is provided with, may I ask that all members of the committee have that information? Is that okay? Thank you very much indeed, and thanks to Councillor Perry for bringing it up. Actually, I would just like to express my thanks and well done to the housing team. Their prevention work has really, overall, so far, it really is very, very good indeed. And I do think that they deserve thanks, particularly when you think of our future pressures, never mind the existing pressures. And I just think they do an outstanding job in this particular instance, so please pass on my thanks.
Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gooch just stole both my points, so well done. Well said, Councillor Gooch. Many thanks.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Nobody has moved this, but I'm noted. Sorry. No, are you happy? Well, I just want to know. Yeah. Okay. Is this noted, members? I don't need a show of hands. Thank you. Right. We move to item 14 on page 46 to 62. And again, Mrs. Woodhouse, I think it's over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So you've seen this plan before. It's now been through the other 3 service committees and their comments are included at Appendix B. The Biodiversity Action Plan has been added to the strategic plan as requested. The other change to highlight that has been requested but not actioned yet is the addition of the word green into the title of the priority area, providing a clean and safe environment. So the committee are asked to consider that tonight. And really I'm looking for your approval to take on to council, but I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Councillor Harper, you indicated first.
Okay, I'd like to move the recommendation as in page 46, but with an amendment. And the amendment would be that the strategic plan 2015 to 2020 and 2018-2019 update is recommended to the full council for approval, subject to the addition of the word green to the safe and clean priority. So it reads safe, clean and green. And that delegated authority is given to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Chairman and Vice Chairman of Policy and Resources Committee to amend the final version of the strategic plan to reflect the amendment of safe and clean priority to safe, clean and green. Okay. And I'll reserve my right to reply.
Okay. I have Councillor Cox first. I have noted you, Councillor Ball.
Yes, I did nominate. I did second, if you like. I'm glad Councillor Harper's brought this up. I do think it will both bolster what we're trying to achieve, and also I think it's good if people can remember some of our policies. And I think making it 3 words will actually make it drive home a bit better. Lots of things we see in the advertising world are in 3s, and it works much better. But I also think the order in which we put them, and as you've mentioned, safe, clean and green, will actually really bolster this. I do think with looking down below, where we're saying we should be delivering the Biodiversity Action Plan, this actually links within people's health and well-being as well, because there are a lot of studies that have been done that say that if people are in a clean and green environment, or green particularly, then their well-being is better as well. So I think it does really stick to our core values and our vision. So I'm happy to second that. Thank you.
Councillor Borton, you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I might have missed something, but if I have, I apologise. If not, could we have a bit more detail on where the addition of this word green has actually come from, and precisely what it actually means, and what it actually adds that wasn't in there already and encompassed under safe and clean environment? Because until I read the report, it was the first I'd heard of it, and I'd just be interested in a bit more detail, really.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Harper?
I think, as Councillor Cox was saying, it's felt that obviously when one looks at environments where people live in, it is very popular nowadays to think in terms of the wider environment and the sort of, obviously the cleanliness, but also, if you like, the greenness, and the use of the word green in its widest environment, not just say in terms of biodiversity, but in terms of the general environment to make sure you're living in a green environment. Lots of evidence has come through from people in terms of the impact green environments have on people and mental health. We're lucky in Maidstone that large parts of the borough are green in their widest sense. We've got good policies in terms of open space. We've got good policies in terms of looking after the countryside. We've got good policies in terms of recycling and so on. And green encompasses all of those. It's also, in its widest sense, encompasses some of our wishes in terms of our integrated transport strategy to move away from reliance on cars and, diesel and so on to other forms of energy and, cycling and walking and so on. So I think it's a generally accepted term now that it's a ambition of communities to promote themselves as being green because it resonates well with the communities we represent.
Councillor Garland.
Thank you, Chairman. Without any disrespect, I do think insertion of the word green is a lot of old guff, quite frankly. What really matters is the implementation of the strategies in the strategic plan. And having looked at it, I think the strategic plan, by and large, is acceptable. I think it does deliver a lot of the objectives that the Council want. So I think in terms of it coming to us for approval, I don't have any issues with that. And quite frankly, I'm not going to die in a ditch where you bung in the word green or not. As long as we all know what it means, not the word green, not interested in that, but as long as we know what the strategic plan does, then that's the major thing. I know I wasn't here at the previous committee when the Biodiversity Action Plan was inserted, and had I been here I would have opposed that because I don't think that needed to be added. This is a strategic document, and I think it's high time that council has actually realised what a strategic document actually is. It is your overarching strategy for the borough, and then you have all these action plans, including the biodiversity one. I've got no issues with that per se, but this is an overarching document. And when we start bunging in action plans here and inserting words green here and left, right and centre, I think it loses its import and its impact. So in terms of what's on the papers in front of us, I would support it, even with the word green. We all know it's a lot of old guff, quite frankly. But in terms of the implementation and the strategic approach being taken, I think it's a fair one.
Well, thankfully, due to your comments, I don't think I need to refer you to a paint chart. You clearly understand green in that context, as you said. Can I go to Councillor English, please? You're next.
Well, I'm tempted at this point to start reading from the collected speeches of Michael Gove, but it is clear that not everyone in the Conservative Party, nationally and locally, shares Councillor Garland's view that green is a load of old guff. It is actually appears to be quite central to DEFRA's strategy for dealing with Brexit. But there we go. Never mind. First of all, 2 points. Councillor Harper referred to the rhetorical device of triple statement, and I always feel that it does add to any headline, strapline that one is going to use in any document to actually put it to have the rule of three, because it actually does add to the rhetorical impact of any statement that's made. So that's a technical point. Secondly, in terms of green, it's quite obvious to most people of all political persuasions and none that there is a huge relationship between the environment, shall we say, and people's health, people's safety, and also the economic vitality of a particular location. So it is actually quite significant and important that our strategic plans do not just have the two legs of the stool in terms of housing and the economy, but actually do have a reference to the wider community and environment within them, because only by having a balanced strategic policy can we actually produce balanced outcomes. So I think it does add something to the document, and I'm glad to hear that Councillor Garland and others will not be dying in the ditch to oppose it, because I feel it adds something, and he clearly doesn't feel that it is so negative that it needs to be opposed.
Councillor Bryce, and then Councillor Blackmore, and Councillor Cox, you indicated you wish to come back.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm surprised to hear Councillor Cox saying that, you know, this is important because of marketing strategy, because as he's reminded me before in this committee, we're not here to sell washing powder, we're here to represent residents. So personally, you know, it represents greenness and people getting out of their cars. Well, I think if you go and talk to residents who live in the rural, more greener areas, they need their cars because their rural bus services are under threat, and it's impossible to get up the hills into Maidstone on a bike, and frankly quite dangerous to do so. And I also think people in my ward would actually say, well, if greenness is so important to you, then stop paving over our green fields and destroying habitats with, you know, all the housing that, you know, could have been resisted and reduced. But anyway, you know, I don't think it's adding anything. If we want to talk about greenness, it should go in the introduction, because all of the policies it relates to are actually scattered through this document rather than all under a clean, green and safe environment. So potentially you should refer to it in the leader's statement rather than in that particular area, because it actually, the green and blue strategy comes somewhere else. The integrated transport strategy comes later in the document as well. But, you know, we could sit here and split hairs about all kinds of things on this council, couldn't we? So,
Councillor Bryce, I will just say a word here, because obviously I'm asked to give a draft, if I can put it that way. I didn't feel that in the draft I could actually preempt what a decision of this committee might be. But we do have a sort of a page 2 draft, knowing that this was coming, and that will be there for full council if that is approved tonight. It was Councillor Blackmore next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Having attended the HCL committee when the word green originally came up, I think the leader will remember that she and I got into a little bit of a tussle over it, because personally I think it adds nothing. What actually matters, and this is something I did bring up at HCL, what matters is the actions that we take and what we do. You can write all sorts of words on a piece of paper, you can write them in an assortment of languages, but it's actually what you do as a council that matters. So if you want to insert the word green, please do so. Personally, I would rather you inserted the word blue, but I don't think that's going to have the same meaning, but that's just my personal preference, as blue is my favourite colour. Having said that, I'd be happy to support it, just so that we can move the refreshed strategic plan on, and we don't end up in a bit of a debacle, which we did last year.
But if we mix blue and green together, we'll end up with yellow, which might suit my side admirably. Councillor Cox, I'm going to give you the last word.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that Councillor Annabel Blackmore has said what she said about being at HCL, because I believe they did actually, in the end, endorse this and vote it through. So I'm glad that that's happened and that we can get on and go to the vote, please.
I'm sorry, I think I did miss Councillor Perry. If you...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I totally agree with Councillor Blackmore, actually, and also with Councillor Bryce. What I don't understand, I don't like the anti-car rhetoric. I'm sorry, and some of us who live in a rural area are not all going to get on our bicycles and go shopping. We probably won't survive the journey, let alone anything else. So I don't like that. I think it's in the wrong place, but I'm not going to spend all night debating this. I think it's actually a meaningless word, personally. And one thing I would add, that in all our resident surveys, we've used the term clean and safe environment. That is what people have voted on time and time again as their most important priority for this council. They haven't added green or blue or any other colour, a plain English clean and safe environment. And that's what I think we should have stuck with. But if we want to go down this road, fair enough. I'm not going to, as had already been said, die in a ditch on it. But I actually think it's not particularly a smart move. Thank you.
Got a lot on the agenda tonight. Councillor English, very, very briefly.
I don't recall any anti-car rhetoric actually in the document. What I think I personally would agree with Councillor David Burton that a green solution here would be completely compatible with a shift to non-internal combustion engines and for cars, electric cars. They're pretty green, so it's not necessary. It's clear that the market is moving towards that being the main option. So there's no incompatibility between being green and continuing to use cars.
Members, we have an amendment. Do you need it to be read out again? No, and are you happy that you've got it as well? All right, can we vote on the amendment then, please? Those in favour, a show of hands. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and those against? Well, that's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, is your hand up? 6. An abstention? 1. That's carried. That becomes a substantive then, please. Can we vote those in favour for the substantive? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, hang on, what did you do? 10. Those against? Abstention? 1 against, 2 against. Are you against, Councillor Perry? It is your hand, not Councillor Bolton's. Right, thank you. Are you saying against, Councillor Blackmore?
Yes, but only because I don't really agree with the word green. It just doesn't do anything.
All right, that's fine, but let me see your hand then. Those against, 2, and abstentions, 3. That is carried. Thank you, members. Agenda item 15 is on pages 63 to 75, Council Tax Penalty Policy. Let Mrs. Coburn. Right. Good evening, Mrs. Coburn. Introduce. Thank you. Can we have one meeting, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This report proposes introducing penalties for those customers who do not report changes or fraudulently claim council tax exemptions and discounts, council tax support or housing benefit. It's important to point out that the majority of residents are honest in the information they supply to the council. This policy is not intended to penalise those vulnerable residents or those who are low earners, but to reassure residents that the council will not tolerate fraud and will take measures to minimise fraud by the issuing of penalties. Written into the policy is the discretion to waive penalties if subsequent information comes to light, such as vulnerability, and to extend payment of the penalties where appropriate. More and more councils raise penalties, with the majority of councils in Kent doing so. And this committee is asked to approve the policy and bring best practice to Maidstone Borough Council. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Holland, you refer.
I think this is fairly self-explanatory and I wholeheartedly agree with it, so I propose we adopt option 2.
I think Councillor Gooch actually put her hand up first. Did you want to speak, Councillor Gooch, now?
Only to express my full support, as Councillor Garland and I'm sure many members do. And what I do like about it is that there is just that little bit of understanding. If something really does crop up, such as a vulnerability of some kind, then you can stop and rethink. And it's a very good document. Thank you.
Councillor English and then Councillor.
I mean, the document is very good, apart from one minor problem, I think, on page 71. I'm aware of a number of my constituents who have made the proper request to the council to have communications in other formats than written because they are blind, for example. Yet when, for example, their parking permit renewals or on occasions council tax information has come through to them, it has still come in the form of a letter. And if those constituents, in some cases, had not had a partner or a neighbour who had actually read those letters out to them, they would never have known that there was a problem. So we need to be sure that we are actually picking up those people who have requested information in alternative formats to make this policy work, because otherwise there could be a serious injustice occurring. So I think on page 71, where the authority requests them to supply it in writing, that needs to be amended or to other appropriate formats where this has been requested or something like that, because otherwise it could be problematic equalities-wise if we just leave it as in writing.
Mrs Coburn.
As far as people that are blind are concerned or need correspondence in large print, we do try to issue our council tax bills in large print. We do, every year we have an indicator on our system, which we will then go to the Blind Society, and they will produce those documents in large print for us, or in Braille. With regard to notification in writing, if somebody is claiming perhaps council tax support, we would need to see evidence. That evidence would need, it could be brought into the gateway, or we could arrange in exceptional circumstances for somebody to go round to somebody's property and look at the information firsthand.
I can't see what the problem is in amending this document to make it clear that alternative formats will be provided where necessary, because I don't think, as it stands, that it's equality compliant if we don't make it clear. If it says that it has to be in writing, that means it has to be in writing. And in the policy document, I really don't see what making that clearer.
You're talking about documents that the person supplies to the authority, because if you're picking up on page 71, it doesn't say, because it says the authority requests them to supply it in writing.
Yes, but what I'm saying is we have had numerous problems where residents have actually requested information in alternative formats, and it has not happened. So and there's no reference to it anywhere in this document.
Well, all right. I think we've got two issues here. You can't really do an amendment on page 71 because that actually specifically refers to us requesting the applicant to provide the information in writing, and sometimes they can't. But I'm not sure. Just a moment. I think there is an issue about we still do have occasions when people are not getting information because they have indicated they need it in another format and they're still not getting it. So I just wonder what we can do to maybe toughen up on that outside of this document.
I can certainly look at that and look at the... if we're notified, then what we can do is we can make sure that that's recorded on our system, and we can look at better ways of making sure that the customer receives communications from us in a manner that is acceptable to them.
So, Councillor English, if you'd like to liaise directly, if we have some direct examples, that would be very useful.
But the people who do struggle to supply information in writing, is there anything we can do about that?
Sorry, Madam Chair, can I just interrupt for a second? It's in the document, page 75, paragraph 2. It says consideration will be given, so it's there.
And I believe Councillor...
We'll let Mrs Coburn come... members will let Mrs Coburn come back, please.
I believe Councillor English is talking about the vulnerable people, and we've specifically said that it's not the vulnerable people that we would be issuing penalties on. If, for any reason, a penalty was issued and we subsequently found out that somebody was vulnerable, we would withdraw it, but we wouldn't be looking to issue penalties on vulnerable people in the first place.
I will obviously have to come back to you with some further details on where it has actually happened, but I won't delay this.
I think it would be useful if you spoke directly with each other, and if we find it needs amending, we can bring it back to amend. Right, Councillor Harvey.
Can I just quickly check two things? The first, do we have suitable staffing and resources to facilitate this happening? And do we foresee that in the future that might become a problem for us? And secondly, in light of the errors identified at audit last month, do we have suitable safeguards in place to prevent administration errors occurring before it gets to the point where we have to say we've made a mistake, we'll withdraw it?
I can answer the first point. I might need to get you to repeat the second point. The first point is, yes, I see that we can do this within our existing resources. The number of penalties we would issue would not be so much that we would need to increase those resources, and they can be done as part of our normal procedures. They would be added onto the council tax bill, and they would be recovered, if necessary, throughout the normal processes that we do. Sorry, could you repeat the second part?
Sorry. It was just that in light of the errors identified at audit last month about administration errors, are there suitable safeguards in place to prevent it from happening in relation to this, so that we don't overcharge someone or say you made a mistake and actually it's our fault?
As regards overcharging, the penalties are set down in the regulations, so we can only issue the penalties that are in the regulations, so we can't. It's not a question that we've got any discretion over the amount. It is actually set down.
Councillor Blackmore, did you want to come, or was that what you wanted to say?
Well, that was part of what I wanted to say, but I think the issue about, the issue about vulnerable people within our borough, I mean, I think the majority of them as a council we are already aware of, and certainly working with other organisations, I just feel that Councillor English is picking on something that actually doesn't really exist. So maybe this isn't quite the forum to generate that inquiry, but maybe outside the meeting would be a better forum.
Well, Councillor Blackmore, I think I'd already suggested that, because in actual fact I do know of one specific case myself. So even if it's one case, it's one too many as far as we're concerned, isn't it? This has been moved by Councillor Garland, seconded by Councillor Gooch. Those, you will find it on page 63. There are two recommendations. Are you happy for me to take them both together? Right, may I have a show of hands, please? Those in favour? It's not. Councillor English doesn't put this up. Those against? Abstention? 1. Thank you very much. Members, we move to agenda. That's carried, I should say. I didn't say. Agenda item 16 is on pages 76 to 97. It's third quarter budget monitoring report. Mr. Green, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the regular quarterly report to your committee showing how we're doing in relation to the budget. The news this quarter is basically positive. We're within budget for the year and projecting an underspend for the year of 505,000 at this stage. The details in the table starting on page 79 in the report. There's quite a few overs and unders from the different services. Amongst the areas where we're well within budget are property investment income, where we've done better than budgeted, parking income. In grounds maintenance, we're generating a lot of third-party income now. That's offset by overspends in amongst other areas on our return on cash investments, on temporary accommodation. Although I have to say, though, that with temporary accommodation, the overspend there is coming down very nicely, and on CCTV. But overall, it's a positive picture. The report also covers the position on capital spend, on the collection fund. It puts forward a number of business rates write-offs for your approval, and it covers the position on treasury management. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Councillor Cox, you indicate.
Thank you very much. Yes. On page 80, looking at internal printing, I know I have spoken to a member of staff particularly about this, but within the report it actually says that it's an area of concern and that we're looking to resolve the underlying issues. If I could just be kept abreast of that, because I did start sort of a liaison with them and some amount of advice. I've seen recently things have been being printed, and I really do think there are commercial ways, if we're not tied in to too many contracts with printers, that there are lots and lots of ways to get things still of good quality, but perhaps with better pricing structures, because we don't have a lot of repeated things. They're one-offs, and they're not necessarily at the same timing that we could link with Tunbridge Wells. So I do think there's scope to bring this back into line.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Certainly very happy to take any advice or pick up any ideas you may have. It's maybe not made entirely clear in the report, but the issue on internal printing hasn't been so much one of cost as volume. The budget assumed a higher volume of printing, maybe the level of volume of printing that we had a few years ago. The volumes have fallen away. The budgets will be adjusted for that next year, but at the moment we're not generating the volume that's needed to cover the costs, which is essentially the reason why we've overspent.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Between pages 79 and 83, there are 10 service areas that say they have more than one or more posts being held vacant. If that's the case, do we need these posts, and does it not present a risk to the individual service areas and to the budget?
It's certainly the case, as you say, Councillor Harvey, that we have made savings through vacancies. And generally what happens is that if somebody gives their notice, it can take time before we appoint a replacement. We do look all the time at service areas for potential efficiencies, and in most cases these are service areas that are able to cover the vacancy on a temporary basis, but they do need to point to them in the longer term. So in general I would say that yes, we generate a short-term saving, but in the interest of delivering the service in the longer term we do need to replace those positions, and we do that.
You happy with that? Councillor Harper.
Thank you. A couple of things. On page 79, on interest and investment, which obviously is under this committee, I wondered whether, and I'm sure Audit and Risk, I think, recently looked at our Treasury management strategy, but I just wondered if we could seek assurance at our minimum reserve level, which I think is referred to in either this report or later reports, of about £2.3 million. If we could see if there's any way of investing that in slightly longer term investments, which might generate a bit more income. If that's the base, that's a minimum reserve, we won't go below. It's just just like everyone else concerned that if we're losing £100,000, then we've got to find that from somewhere else. And if there is any way we could earn a bit more on that very basic part of our reserves, which we don't intend spending, then it'd be worth a couple of hours worth of thinking about, I'd have thought. That's the first question.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. When we come on to the Treasury Management Strategy, you'll see that we have an upper limit of £5 million for investments over 365 days. And generally that's where we would hope to get slightly better returns, but we aren't really in the business of chasing the maximum returns, because we have to balance the security of the investment against the return that's available. And it would only be a relatively small amount that we would want to put away or invest for a longer period of time, because most of our cash balances over the next few years are going to be reinvested in the capital programme.
Councillor Harper, before you come with your next question, Councillor McLaughlin just indicated on this specific point, if you want to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I would rather highlight the inadequacy of our budgeting on the investment return we would hope to get this year, rather than look at taking more higher risk investments with the money that we've got. I mean, we must have had foresight that interest rates weren't going anywhere for the last 12 months, so I do question how a budget has got so far out on this issue.
Mr. Green.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. I think it's a fair point, and we have addressed that in the 18-19 proposed budget. When we come on to that, you'll see that in the strategic revenue projection, we've reduced the budget for income from cash balances by 120,000, which is recognising the reality that interest rates are low, and although they may be starting to move upwards, it won't be to an extent that would allow us to recover that 100,000 or so.
I'm going to go back to Councillor Harper. I'll let you come back again, Councillor McLaughlin, in turn if you wish.
Okay, my next clarification, I suppose, is on paragraph 2.7 on page 79, just above the table of all the variances. From memory, is it the June cycle where if we've confirmed an over or underspend for the council, that committees can put proposals forward for spending sort of residual, I suppose, leftover underspends in their own areas? I can see officers nodding, so that's obviously the case. That's helpful. Just one comment, I suppose, and then I'm going to move a proposal. I think one of the things we need to be careful in terms of staff vacancies and so on is the long-term impact, because when we look at things like capital programme and various other policies, we do see the impact where there are staff vacancies, because it often leads to slippage. It leads potentially to rollover from one year to another, and our capital programme is fairly classic in that. But also, in delays of, certain improvements and pieces of work and so on. So I think we'd have to be careful that whilst sort of vacancies are good in the short term, helping us, bridge the budget and obviously bringing in part of this £500,000 positive bottom line, it is probably at the expense at certain places within the council of work which we would like to have had done, not necessarily being done. So, a staff saving, obviously, you have to look at it in terms of swings and roundabouts. I'd like to move the recommendations 1 to 5 on page 76. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, 1 to 5. Plus, I'd like to make an amendment. Okay, and the amendment would be that we ask that the Employment Committee, one, reviews the Maidstone Borough Council sickness policy to ensure it follows best practice. Secondly, considers the support provided by the council for staff with mental health issues. And thirdly, considers the causes of mental health issues in the workplace. Okay, I'd just like to say a few words and backing up why I'm proposing that. I think one of the things, and another classic impact of when you do have staff turnover, high turnover, is that workload tends to get redistributed in the short term onto people. The classic symptom of that comes out in terms of mental health and stress issues, and I'm sure Maidstone Council's workforce is not immune to that, which happens in virtually every other work environment in the country. So I think it would just be worth us asking, as I say, Employment Committee just to review our policies in this area, and especially look at what support we do provide people with mental health issues in the workplace, and also perhaps consider the causes of such incidences in our workplace.
Councillor Harper, I don't think that would be an amendment to the recommendations. It would be a recommendation to, to the committee.
Yeah, okay, sorry, that would be, yeah, okay. That's an additional recommendation, and it's a recommendation that we...
Yes, the recommendation. So you're still moving the recommendations that are on the paper?
Yeah, I'm still moving the recommendations 1 to 5, but I'd like that.
And then requesting a recommendation to the Employment Committee.
Yes.
Right. Is that seconded? Councillor English.
First, I'd like to second the first motion. I was actually literally going to mention the point you've just made. I'm quite happy to second that recommendation as well, but it is clearly a separate recommendation, as you say, Madam Chairman, rather than an amendment to the first one.
If I continue with the people who wish to speak, and then we'll just reconfirm where we're at. Was that? So, yes, you seconded it. So, Councillor Perry, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of points, and one that concerned me, and it's on page 82, street cleansing. It mentions staff sickness, overtime payments, and the additional work on fly tipping, and I'm wondering what's been done to resolve this, and it seems to be an area that is clearly under pressure, and I think we need to think about that very carefully. The other point is on page 81, the Mid-Kent Planning Support Service. You've got 2 vacant posts and you're not intending to replace them, from what I see. And yet that's been an area in the past that's also been under some pressure. And I am concerned that, you know, we might be making a rod for our own back. But I'd like to just get your views on that. Thank you.
In relation to the Mid-Kent Planning Support Team, I kind of fully accept that there's been a difficult past in terms of performance of the team, but for the last 18 months or so, performance has been kind of exceeding target, and the service has been planning for some time to reduce the level of staffing. So this isn't kind of unexpected. This has been a planned change to bring the cost of the service down.
On the other point, Councillor Perry, about street cleansing, with the staff sickness, clearly the Council has processes which Councillor Harper alluded to for addressing staff sickness if people are off on a long-term basis. And I understand that the service is working through those issues and that the cases are coming to a conclusion. On the fly tipping, the issue there is that if we collect fly tip materials, we have to pay for disposal of those. So if there's a big volume of fly tip waste, it does cost us, but I understand that the volumes are coming down now.
Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a simple question on Councillor Harper's concerns would be what is staff turnover currently and should we be concerned by it? So that would be the simple question to ask, but I doubt we have that information to hand. I think, just going back to the point Councillor Cox raised on the printing, can you just run me through those figures? So does that mean that we are, what does that minus £47,000, minus £83,000 mean?
The way the internal printing service works is they have a target for internal income from printing. They recharge other services for printing they do. As I suggested before, those targets are frankly over-ambitious because they assume a higher volume of printing taking place within the council than is currently the case. So they're not achieving those targets, and as I said, we are adjusting the budgets next year because there's no point trying to generate print work for them if it's not there.
Thank you, Mr Green. That would fit with our green policy then, wouldn't it? That we are reducing our printing costs, therefore likely to generate less income. And we should have, maybe we should have touched on that earlier. Thanks.
The Chief Exec would just like to come in for a moment, please.
Just to respond to the point made about turnover. Turnover for the last 12 months has been just about 11%, slightly higher than we've seen in the past. We do produce a regular quarterly workforce analysis where we consider all sorts of things, including reasons for absence and trends in reasons for absence, and therefore our response to those. So I think the Employment Committee is asked to see that on a regular basis, and as far as I'm aware, that has been happening. If it would help to circulate that more widely, and following this discussion, it seems to me that there may be an appetite amongst members from this committee to see that report. I'd be more than happy to circulate it. And then you can see the whole picture in terms of the size of the workforce, the composition, where turnover is occurring, where people are leaving and joining, and the reasons for people leaving the organisation. And I hope that will reassure you that it's something that we take very, very seriously and have a very structured way of analysing. So more than happy to share that if you would like.
So members, of this committee, would you like to see that? Yes? No? Yes. I think that the Employment Committee does actually have these details, and anybody can come to that committee if they wish. But if there's anybody here who particularly wants to see that, then talk to us afterwards, and we'll make sure you get it. Mr. English, did you have anything else you wish to say?
No, no, not particularly. I think it's all been covered. I just formally second the motion, and I'll leave it at that. Both motions.
All right, members, I have nobody else indicating. There are 5 parts to this first recommendation. Do you wish me to take them separately, as they're quite complicated, or are you happy to have them all taken together? Could I have a show of hands for all together? That is the majority. Oh, all right. They're on page 76. Those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. And then we go to Councillor Harper's recommendation to the Employment Committee. Would you like to read that out again, just so people are clear?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's Employment Committee 1 reviews the Maidstone Borough Council sickness plan to ensure it follows best practice. 2, considers the support provided by the Council for staff with mental health issues. And 3, considers the causes of mental health issues in the workplace.
Members, that was seconded by Councillor English. Those in favour, please show. We do it anyway, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 11. Those against? 3. And abstention? 1. Thank you. That is carried, members. Yes. Members, before I move on to the next item, just to remind everybody that it is actually Wellbeing Week next week. There are quite a lot of things going on in the Council. Councillors may wish to participate in some of them and show a lead by example. So you might like to find out what they are. Members, I know it's still early, but I suspect that the financial strategy may take a while. Do you want a 5-minute break? Yes? All right. Well, I'll make it 10 minutes then. Please be back here at just gone 22. Thank you. Members, while we wait for Councillor Borton, could I suggest that if you need to read the emergent... Oh, here he is. No, I have to say I held Councillor Borton up on the stairs, so... So, members, before we open formally, do you need a little bit of time to read the additional item, the emergency item, or are you there? Can I ask? Do you need some time? No? Okay, we go straight in. Then we're on pages 98 to 102, agenda item 17, the medium-term financial strategy and budget proposals 2018-19. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This report's the culmination of the budget process that we've been going through over the past few months. It brings together all the budget proposals for next year so that you can consider whether to recommend them to Council at its meeting on 28th of February. And there's various items here that you're asked to agree. First of all, at Appendix A is an updated strategic revenue projection. Now, the projections have changed since you last saw these back in December. There's a number of new developments that have taken place, and there's a summary of the changes at paragraph 132 on page 105. And what's happened, we originally were projecting a surplus for next year of 349,000, and that's now come down to 97,000. And you can see in the table on page 105 the things that have changed. There's a number of positives and there's a number of negatives. On the positive side, we have the opportunity, should you choose to increase council tax by 3%, as is now permitted, as opposed to the 2% that we were assuming originally. And just on that particular point about the increase in council tax, this report recommends that Council increases the council tax by 3%, and the reasons are set out in paragraph 120 on page 103. First of all, the extra 142,000 that generates ensures that we have a balanced budget. It also helps for the future because we don't know that the referendum limit will be at the 3% level in the future. We may be more constrained in future as to what we can do with council tax. And also by putting up council tax in this way, we do set the threshold higher for the future, so we have more flexibility in future years as to whether we put up council tax. And the effect of that extra 1% on council tax is about 5 pence a week for a Band D household. So that's the first thing that you asked to agree, the strategic revenue projection in Appendix A. You also asked to agree the budget savings at Appendix B. Now, these came here back in December. They haven't changed since then. They've also now been to all the service committees, and no changes were proposed to the budget savings in the service committees. The next thing that you've got in front of you at Appendix C is the proposals for using the proceeds of the business rates retention pilot. And you had an item at your last meeting about the process for how we might go about spending this money, which is estimated to be 640,000. What you've got at Appendix C is 12 projects that have been put forward which meet the criteria for the business rates retention pilot of spending a relatively small amount of money initially to secure longer-term benefits and to support growth in the future. So you may want to consider those 12 projects and whether they, in your view, meet the criteria and whether they're ones that you're content to support. You're asked to agree the detailed budget proposals at Appendix D, so this sets out the budget for next year in detail, committee by committee. At Appendix E, you've got the capital programme, which has also already been to this committee at last month's meeting. At Appendix F, you've got the Treasury Management Strategy. Now, this has been to Audit, Governance and Standards Committee already. What you've got here is the strategy as agreed by Audit Governance and Standards Committee, with just some slight changes to the numbers to reflect the proposed capital programme. And the Treasury Management Strategy is important in this context because it shows how we are going to finance the capital programme. The schedule that was circulated late, and apologies for not including that in the original papers, of the prudential indicators which give you a way of benchmarking how we're doing against Treasury Management Strategy, but these two have been to Audit Governance and Standards Committee, and Audit Governance and Standards will be familiar with these indicators. Appendix G shows our level of reserves and where they're projected to be as at the end of next year if these budget proposals are adopted. And the projection is that our budget proposals would give a level of reserves of 6.2 million at the end of next year, which is adequate, not excessive, but perfectly acceptable and well in excess of the 2.3 million that Council has set in the past as being the minimum required level of reserves that we should hold. And finally, at Appendix H, you've got the medium-term financial strategy, which has been approved by Council, but there are a few updates in there to reflect the various changes since the MTFS went to Council back in October. So a lot of detail here, but it brings together all the information that is needed to recommend a budget to Council at its meeting in a couple of weeks' time. I'm obviously happy to take any questions on the detail here.
Councillor Garland.
Thank you, Chairman. Just want to ask a few questions just to ensure I've got my understanding correct. So to me, the key thing in this particular debate is the changes that will come about as a result of the permissible increase to council tax without referendum kicking in. So on page 105, I think that table that you have produced under the word summary is the key thing for me. So as I understand it, the additional council tax that would arise from that additional 1% increase from 2% to 3% will be 142,000. That's not the aggregate amount of council tax that you would raise. That's simply the addition as a result of the 1% increase. Is that correct? Okay. So if that council tax was to remain at 2%, for argument's sake, then the only, and everything else remained the same on this particular list of strategic changes, then the only difference would be a reduction in the surplus that will be available to plug the gap in 2019-20. Is that correct? The difference. Oh.
Yeah, so the effect would be that rather than having a surplus of 97,000 next year, we'd have a deficit of 45,000.
Now, in terms of the staff pay award, that 2% increase across the board, firstly, I'm surprised it's been offered without the budget having been agreed, first of all, by this committee, then full council, but that's a point that the Chief Executive might like to raise. And has therefore been offered to staff, and therefore almost it's sacrosanct, you can't do anything about it as members or councillors. And then my second point on the staff award of 2% is that, does that apply to increment levels as well? So all members of staff will get a 2% rise in their base salary. As you rise through the increments, will those individual increment pay amounts also increase by 2%? And if that is the case, then is that increase also taken account in the 173,000 being proposed here?
Yes, if I start on the figures, and the Chief Executive will respond on the first point you raised. What the additional 173,000 does is it funds the 2%, which is a 2% applied across the board to all grades. So if staff achieve an increment, and many staff at the council are already at the top of that scale, so they don't get increments. But staff who get increments would get that in addition to the 2%, and that's factored into the budget.
Would those actual individual increments increase by 2%? So if somebody's on a base salary of 30,000, the next increment is 5,000. Would that £5,000 also increase by 2%? And is that included in the 173? It is.
Perhaps I could just add two things. The assumptions that you saw earlier in the year made provision for incremental progression, and as Mr Green has said, only a certain number of people will make that progression for two reasons. One, because about half our staff are on the top of their grade, so there is no further increment to be achieved. And secondly, progression is dependent on performance against objectives. So that's the first point to make. And the assumption at that point in time was for a 1% increase in basic pay. I have two things to say about the 2%. One of the reasons that we've included it relates to our ability to retain staff. The negotiations at a national level, and we're not part of the national pay scheme, but nevertheless it is a relevant consideration. Certainly from what we understand of the negotiations there, that the outcome will be at least 2%. In fact, 2% has been rejected by in the national pay negotiations. We benchmark our pay against the median for the South East for our sector. So we don't benchmark it at the top, but to remain competitive, we benchmark it in the middle. And so our view is that unless our pay stays competitive, then we will see our turnover rates rise further as people choose to work in other organisations where the reward is higher for the same job. As far as the staff and the trade unions are concerned, the negotiations that we have had there have been very carefully caveated to say that the outcome of the budget decision-making by yourselves at full council will be what the decision is. And so we couldn't make a cast iron guarantee to the trade unions because of that. So we caveated it very carefully. But as I'm sure you'll appreciate, and I'm sure you'll recall, Councillor Garland, from when you were leader of the council, you have to have those that dialogue in the run-up to making the budget.
Councillor Garland, did you have any more questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. It was about Appendix C. My recollection from the last meeting was that we were going to go away and look at proposals, but this was something that was going to be, given the fact that the money hasn't been accrued yet, this was something that was a longer-term project. So I'm mightily surprised to see some quite firmed-up proposals in this document, and I would actually like to take these out of this budget because we don't have the money yet, and I also don't feel that there's been enough consultation with wider council members, because obviously this has got quite a big implication in terms of some of the things that we're talking about in here in terms of community funds and things like that. So I just wondered if there was, if that was just my recollection or other members felt similarly.
Councillor Bryce, it was clearly stated at the last meeting that officers had been requested to suggest ideas that within the guidelines of what it was, to actually suggest those. But I'll ask Mr Green to come in.
Yes, these were prepared in response to what was agreed at the last meeting. The other thing that I would say is that it's correct that the income hasn't been accrued as yet, but it's based on projections of what will be collected in business rates over the coming year. So we can be reasonably confident that the money will come in. The other thing that was mentioned in the report last month was that we won't spend all of the money on 1st of April. We will monitor business rates income during the course of the year, and if at any point it appears that the income will fall short of the projected levels, then we'll be able to halt expenditure. The reality of projects like this is that the money won't all be spent at the beginning of the year, and it may be appropriate to prioritise the spend so that we do spread the expenditure during the course of the year, and we don't have any of the risks that you're alluding to.
Thank you. The minutes say that we were going to discuss at a later date, not this meeting, the protocol. So we have some specific ideas. Yes, that was agreed, but we have no protocol here for prioritisation. We have no protocol, unless I've missed it, and please point out to me if I have. I also have grave concerns about these projects. So we have a community environmental engagement group. Looks like we're going to build a website, maybe do some research. I mean, I shouldn't be saying we shouldn't do research, but it's £90,000. We have a property asset review, which I'm quite surprised we need to find additional funds for. I would have thought it would have been incumbent on us to have done that anyway. We have a marketing campaign, £35,000 on a marketing campaign. We have data analytics for inclusive growth. So here we are talking about looking at what data we have, and we say that we might have some quantitative data, but we need some qualitative data. Well, qualitative data is the opposite to data analytics, quite separate things. Qualitative is exploratory, understanding things. Data analytics is quantitative. And the project would review the relevant information that is available. It would define a broader set of metrics based on the available data and would establish processes for extracting and presenting this data on a regular basis. So explain that to us in layman's terms. But when I tot up these various things, 90,000, 35,000, 35,000, I get to 160k, which is about 25% of our budget, which we're spending on marketing, surveys, spin. Is this what we're elected to do? 25% of extra cash just going on websites and marketing campaigns when we're putting up council tax? Anyway, I may have misunderstood, so please come back to me.
Mr Green, I think what people are seeking some assurance on is that before any of these kick off, people will understand in detail what they are and what they are for in much more detail. Can you give some assurance, please?
Yes, well, we went through a process of getting officers, sponsors of these various projects to prepare a project implementation document, if you like, that sets out the details of what is going to be done on these projects and what will be delivered, and in particular what the benefits will be, because the whole point of this is that it's pump priming money. It's not money that is going to be spent and that's the end of it. There will be outputs and benefits at the end of these projects. So we've gone through a thorough process in getting officers to put forward proposals that stand up, but clearly it's open to this committee to consider the projects and decide whether they think there's things they want to keep or remove.
So if we vote on this tonight, though, we're voting on these projects and they're written down, and yet I don't feel that data... What does a data analytics project mean? That you're going to go away and find some data about what? I mean, you know, this isn't good enough. This is £640,000 of extra funds, and 25% of it is going on a marketing campaign. Well, we've already got a marketing budget. Community environmental engagement, that's not broken down. I mean, the only output there seems to be a website. Well, it doesn't take £90,000 to build a website. We've got another £35,000 building a website here. Well, let's just hire a web designer, you know, and then we can fill him up with projects for the year, because I don't think he'd be charging you £125,000 a year in salary. I know I'm simplifying things and I'm being a little bit pushy, but, you know, we're making decisions on asking people for more money when there aren't pay rises within the wider community going out there. And I just think spending 25% of additional money on these surveys and things which aren't really fleshed out and you know, challenge me, councillors. Do you understand what data analytics for inclusive growth means? You know, I think we should take this out and consider it more closely, because you've only had a few weeks, in fairness, since we kind of discussed it at the last meeting to pull these together.
I'm going to ask Chief Exec to come in about precisely what was agreed at the last meeting.
Before I do, I'd just like to ask Councillor Bryce to clarify the point that I probably only heard part of earlier about protocols.
Yes, happy to. In the minutes, and again correct me if I'm wrong, but in the minutes when we talked about it, it says... it's page 4. Further information will be contained in the budget proposals for consideration by this committee. So it didn't specify that we would, it just said officers will develop more detailed proposals for the investment of the FSF. Further information, didn't say surveys or, you know, particularly what we're going to do, will be contained in the budget proposals for consideration by this committee. A process will be set out in this report for project approval. So I just wondered in terms of prioritisation and how we're going to say this project goes first, or this is... Because in the papers we've got a... Unless I've missed it, and I'm really sorry, members, if I'm taking your time, and I have, but you know, does this denote an order here in terms of when these kick in? Sorry.
Okay, so this is my understanding of the report that we brought to your last committee and why we are bringing Appendix C on this occasion, as opposed to an occasion in the future. And I'll just preface my comments by saying, if it's the view of the committee that you don't want to consider this particular appendix this evening, then don't consider it. But in our last report, we gave the information that the pilot bid had been successful and how much money on a one-off basis, not for recurring use, but for one-off. We recommended for one-off projects, and I think you accepted that. That's how we would use the money. We asked you to consider a set of principles, and that's referred to earlier in the minutes of the meeting, and those principles were agreed. And what we've endeavoured to do is to come forward with projects that meet those principles. Now, it's entirely open to you to decide whether or not you wish to take those recommendations in whole or part or nothing. I will make just one comment on the data analytics. There is the reason for bringing this idea forward links to the experience that we, I think, have had in strategy development, particularly the local plan, and learning some of the lessons from there about having considering growth in a much more constructive way. Now, you made some comments earlier today about paving over the countryside, reducing the amount of growth that we should have, and so on. But nevertheless, we have a plan that has growth within it. This is intended to be a response to being able to achieve good growth and understanding and being able to measure whether or not that is what we're achieving. Now, we could have put a lot of information in here about that, but there are some national sets of indicators for inclusive growth and for vibrant economies that we think we could usefully use to monitor the impact of all the different policies that we are pursuing. Now, that impact, to my mind, is a really important thing to measure. So I'm just giving you that as an indication, because we can all throw terminology around. By its very nature, this is a report covering very many issues. The descriptions are very succinct. If you're not comfortable with them, then don't approve them.
Councillor Borton, you wanted to come on this specific point.
I did, thank you, Madam Chairman, and obviously I'll speak on other appendices later, I think, but developing on the point that Councillor Bryce has said, because I was quite vocal at the last meeting about asking for detail of where this money would be spent so that we could relate that back to our communities. And where I agree with Councillor Bryce is we are in effect tonight recommending a budget to Council. And from what I've heard, we can do so without the detail that is provided in Appendix C. What we can do in the budget is say that, as we agreed last month, is that this money has been agreed to be spent on capital expenditure over the next financial year. We don't need to, and correct me if I'm wrong, say we will be spending £90,000 on community environmental engagement and £80,000 on town centre regeneration opportunities, etc. That's something that's within our gift as a committee to do tonight, because I agree with some of the points that Councillor Bryce has made with regards to some of the projects that she's mentioned. And personally, for example, I cannot support a community fund for elected councillors when we have no we are not mayors, we don't have statutory power ourselves, we have to do something through the committee system, so I don't think we should be given money to kind of do so. I can't balance that myself. I've got further questions I'd like to ask on the property asset review. I think personally, and I very much welcome the money going into identifying individuals at risk of homelessness and rough sleepers. £160,000 is going to help. It might not solve the problem, but it will create recurring costs the year after, because this is obviously just a one-off cost and we will have to budget for that this time next year. I would support wants to see and how it wants to budget that we have agreed that does rightly say that's what I would like to
speak.
I suppose first formulate
At this point in time, Councillor.
very well and also the level of detail the table on page 100. We have a budgeted balanced budget for next year. The officers already mentioned which have announced and inflation on us. There's a good argument Maidstone Council, because our future know that when we look at the media as a result of what we did last going further forward. Rewarding staff 2%. Currently have been rejected at 2%. Well, the Chief Executive is already running at around 11. Every year or every other. Listen, look, we've got to try to go ahead with that. Some of my colleagues opposite. And tonight, obviously they're very some of these quite detailed. But it's two counters sitting opposite. The briefing. Review, so the bus improvement. There. Clean, safe and green. Of pushing that promote their individual disengagement. I, for one, think 90. You may or might. Problems of homelessness. A home for everyone. Guide and identify This money only comes promoting getting this boost our borough.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Councillor
Clarification on some of the figures. In 18 revised estimate. $5,260 increase has come from.
Last year we had a is now part
original approved estimate was 17. Team. I think someone was taken out. And obviously the estimate for 1890 last year was 302. Museum grant funded activity. $172,000.
separate item. It wasn't funding will be directly with the two netting off. Is between the is 275,000. Increase.
All right, Councillor Borton. Councillor Borton, are you?
But I'll see what other members say as well.
Yeah, hold my right, please.
Thank you.
To Appendix C. For the recommendations to be considered. I'm sure there's money that could be well as a priority far councillor perspective that our Labour so and let them come up with these suggestions. On this tonight, if find it. We did with residents. For next year. Fraction, but it's still a large point. We've got Park, Kent Life, we haven't yet got detailed this year have been constructed, all of which annual budget. Will it
yes, I'll deal with it. Does actually include parks and open space. Culture appears to be by the communities how certainly no intention to the contribution that budgets, because as you say, here that should probably
as you say, but there are and perhaps get the
view of some Conservative members on some time ago, to forego the cuts. Now, tax-free grant. The effect of their decision is over this year's revenue budget. We box ourselves into a corner. Councils have made the mistake and has found out several years later. Next, Appendix C. I think the question I have in my mind this evening that there is certainly some members would like to know I have to say that I don't think it's the outcomes of most of the proposals. I don't think the Conservative councils, the members going forward, there is a and the idea that leisure and culture need to do that. Council's neck. It isn't an because I think, and I would and possibly a little
Mr. Green, do you want to come? Councillor.
Very welcome. We're sort of used to it, really. Amount of room for manoeuvre. I wish we did. Effectively, what this 600 I'm going to have my Aston Martin. Personally, I think we should that we're able to sit there and say, well, Cornwall's one about the housing delivery. And I'm all groups, maybe just idea, because I would hate for this it then means it does of these projects, but I'm so that's a little rubbish. We've burnt our fingers in the past. I'm are they they should be reviewed again?
Some quite significant we have taken a prudent so it's not just plucking figures from not wildly optimistic.
With you is that every councillor should know about small groups have to. So while we bid. I have
Thank you, Chairman. About it. I certainly know that members mate with Chief you name it, that kind of thing. My group and invited ideas. A little more efficient in bag about things go ahead with that because that will upset be spreading out in very clearly laid out. Rise in the council. Kind of workshop then, so but if we want to have to these working groups, I'm sure we don't want to wipe out the museum. Come on.
come back as well. No, okay.
I think members and so forth. That we need to remove the Conservatives believe that environmental budget is very important as well. In terms of the overall budget, however, I think come out this evening concerning some of in terms of reinforcing
I've got
looking very strategic priorities as agreed tonight. Give ourselves more resources to do so. £1,000 budgeted for it. So it's more. I think lots of the issues I in terms of the quality of the environment. Councillor Garland, I think this is
I wish we'd known both just agree.
I thought at the last council meeting to consultations with the director of again, at least a two-majority.
Amendment only applied to management. Actually, if we have Garland can't speak English yet.
We've got a situation where the government is vehicles. So there's a and so I would like it probably is, but whether the on that, I think
right, Councillor Cox.
It's on printing leaflets that actually need and used.
I mean, the communications.
We need to think how to vote accurately. I think enforcement's in. Either need to stick it on to recommendation so we get it, please.
And it is just a view. It is a view. However, it is important that we have shifted priority. But what appears others groups may disagree with the that money should go is but one example of that. And therefore, that's the point.
The amendment first. Could I
accepting the amendment that has just been against. We'll take it with all the others we can.
Councillor Harper spoke at the beginning. One question to Mr. Green. Very buffer, -14.
It's is offset by 200,000. Is because what it will be successful and business income that we expect to collect reducing the level of income that we
see. I think this you had the ability to a good percentage anyway. That we are now trying I don't agree with that. I think coming forward to us, and I when we look at our 2%, per week on a band. When we look forward to 2020, and I think we must put up tax. So I would hope I think you've covered a lot of the bases.
Because I didn't mean to. So I'm going to take these one by one. Because I don't. Yeah. You have not made a suggestion.
Recommendation as in Appendix C.
I think could you please
Agree projects to be further consideration regarding the stuff we want to go ahead with and put forward.
How you can prioritise if you put
you've moved it? Are you?
Full stop. Yes.
In favour, please show.
Thank you, members.
Taken. So could I have a show? Now we've got a together. Are you prepared to actually that solves that problem? With wording, Councillor McLaughlin. And go to item 1. Set out in Appendix A. Out in Appendix D. Show next one. We have to take that one again. Those number 3 agrees the budget. Six. And 2018-19 set out in agrees the that's 14 again. F recommendation to council. Those in 29 increase in agree. Two, three, four, five. No abstentions then. Right. Where did we get to? Council tax in accordance with the local government I just make something like to it, just like that, which the communications theme. Right. Set out in part 2 of